Welcome everyone to this virtual session. This is the third day of our virtual compliance officers conference week, and here we'll be covering continuing competence and how to get it right. You may now be familiar with how webinars work, but just in case, we want this session to be all about questions. You will have the option to ask your question anonymously, and we will try to answer your questions towards the end of the webinar. The video will be available to watch again, as well as links to relevant resources on our on-demand web page. This is linked below the video, and please feel free to share this with your colleagues. We have already emailed you the full biographies of all our speakers as part of the conference programme. So just a bit of logistics in terms of how this will work. First, we will broadcast the panel session from our face-to-face event that we held on the 21st of October. Then I will return to chair for a live Q&A session with our speakers. So enjoy the video.
Welcome. This is the session looking at continuing competence. It's vital that solicitors keep their knowledge and skills up to date throughout their career to provide good quality legal services and uphold confidence and trust in the legal profession. So I'm pleased to say that we've got a fantastic panel with us today from a range of practice settings who are going to share their views on this important topic. But before we start with questions, let's do some introductions. So to my left, we have Richard Williams, who is a policy manager at the SRA. Richard is heavily involved in leading our work on continuing competence on a day-to-day basis. Welcome, Richard. We then have Claire Bennyworth, who is... Sorry, this side now, we've switched to Claire, who's a legal capability manager at BAE Systems PLC. Her role includes knowledge management, training, and works closely with the Chief Counsel of Compliance and Regulation, who oversees ethics, governance and compliance of the organisation, as well as the legal function. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
Then we have Polly Douglas, who is a partner and the CULP at General Counsel of Law firm Michon Durea LLP. Welcome, Polly. And finally, we have Daniela Mahapatra, who is a specialist employment solicitor and deputy director of WSSP Legal and Risk Services, the in-house legal service for the NHS in Wales. Welcome, Daniela. Okay, so let's get started with questions. Richard, I'm going to come to you first. Can you remind everyone here what the SRA requires of solicitors in terms of their ongoing learning and development?
Absolutely. So our regulatory requirements require solicitors to carry out regular learning and development so that they remain competent. Our code of conduct for firms requires firms to ensure that anyone they employ also carries out learning and development and is competent to perform their role. And we require, as part of the practicing certificate renewals exercise, that all solicitors confirm to us that they have addressed their learning and development needs and have made a declaration they're competent to do their job. So that approach is really designed to make sure that solicitors and firms can take ownership and accountability of how and what learning and development they do and how they go about doing it. There's lots of flexibility in there for solicitors and firms to meet those requirements in a way that suits their particular practice area or their particular business. So we don't prescribe the learning and development a solicitor should be doing. That's very much up to solicitors and up to firms. But we do say in our continuing competence resources, which are on our website, that one way a solicitor can meet their regulatory requirement to maintain their competence is to regularly reflect on the quality of their practice and address any identified learning and development needs. And those resources also say that if you're looking for tools on how to reflect, you can use our statement of solicitor competence, which defines the skills, knowledge and behaviours required of a competent solicitor to help you identify if you have any learning and development needs.
That's great, thanks. Can I just ask a follow-up question, Richard? It's in two parts. So how does the SRA understand if solicitors are meeting their obligation, and what have you found when you've gone out to do your work?
So we have a quite comprehensive programme of monitoring in place to help us as the regulator obtain assurances that solicitors and firms are meeting those obligations I've just outlined. So we regularly ask for solicitors to submit evidence to us that they are carrying out learning and development. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I think we've looked at over 1,000 training records or learning development plans from solicitors. We also go into firms and have conversations with them about how they make sure that they are ensuring the competence of their solicitors. And again, over the last couple of years, I think we've visited over sort of 80 firms. And we also analyse the reports that come into us to try and identify competence themes or issues. So, and we publish that annually. Well, we have done since 2023 in what we call our annual assessment of competence. And again, that's on our website. And what that activity shows us is that actually most solicitors and firms take their obligation to maintain their competence seriously. And firms have some really good systems and approaches in place to make sure that those that they employ are competent to do so. However, we have identified through that work some wider shortcomings in how solicitors and to some degree firms meet their obligations. So, for example, we have found that it's very difficult for us as a regulator to understand why a solicitor has carried out learning and development and whether that learning and development they carried out was driven by any meaningful reflection. I think what that means really in practice is that there's no explanation provided by solicitors why they carried out their learning and development. We've also found that actually by and large most learning and development carried out by solicitors focuses exclusively on maintaining technical legal knowledge, and that has to be right.
Yeah.
However, there are other areas of a solicitor's practice that might well be required to ensure that they're competent. And we're not seeing much evidence of those being carried out. And a really good example of that is learning and development focusing on professional ethics and upholding professional obligations. We see very few examples of solicitors carrying out that particular type of learning and development. And then the final reflection from that work is actually we see very few solicitors using our warning notices and guidance to help ensure that they are remaining competent. Now, our warning notices and guidance, by and large, explain our expectations in terms of how solicitors can meet a particular issue, a particular rule. And we don't see much evidence that they are being used, which kind of raises questions as to whether or not, I suppose, individuals are fully understanding what it is they need to do to be competent. So we see those issues, regularly in the work that I've outlined, and I think we've now reached a position that, given the frequency of those issues, it's now time for us to think about whether or not we should be strengthening those our current regulatory requirements I explained in the previous question. So we will be consulting shortly on how we think we can do that, and really I suppose the force behind the consultation is really to address those issues that I've identified, but also to further embed some of the really good practice we're seeing across the profession in terms of learning and development.
That's great. Thank you, Richard. So you mentioned that many firms have a positive learning and development culture. Now, if I can come to our panellists, and maybe I'll come to you first, Daniela. So a question is, what tips or approaches have you used to create or drive a positive learning and development culture within your team or organisation?
Great, thanks, Alex. Just for a bit of context, I'm Daniela, as we mentioned, and our organisation is the in-house legal team in the NHS in Wales. So we're about 190 people, just for that sort of context. We're an in-house organisation, so we are not a regulated firm. Every individual is regulated, but in the same way, everybody is responsible for their own learning and development. So I think in order to have that positive learning and development culture and mindset, it really needs to be role modelled from the top, from the directors, from the partners. And actually, we need to move away from those jokes about, oh, it was nice that you had that day off because you went to a conference. We were here working hard, because I think we can easily move into that space where we think the paid client work is the most important thing. And actually, it's a regulatory responsibility for us all to have that continued learning and development. So I think trying to embed that into your culture is really important. So one of the things we've done is we've made it as part of our key performance indicators. So we have a CPD app. Every member of staff is required to add in an item of CPD per month, so 12 per year. That could be reviewing an email update on a case. It could be delivering some training. It could be reading a barrister's advice on something novel that they haven't read before. You know, it doesn't have to be the attending external CPD type events. And so we have a KPI around that, which means we're measuring that constantly. We want people to be taking time to learn and to continue to improve. We also support that by every member of staff is entitled to a one-to-one meeting every month with their line manager on top of the normal day-to-day management stuff. And we have a template for that, so suggested topics for prompts. And one of those is your learning and development. How are you getting on? Are there any gaps? Is there anything you need us to support you with? We also make sure that the learning isn't just topic specific. It isn't just about being a property lawyer or a clinical negligence lawyer. And an example of that would be recently, unfortunately, we had a secretary take a call where a litigant in person on the other side, you know, hopefully this isn't too sensitive, but it was saying that they were suicidal and gave information about that. And that was a really tricky call for that secretary to handle. So as we took that back as a business and thought, right, we need to upskill our staff to have those conversations. And we had some training this week on suicide awareness and management so that as non-professionals in the mental health space, you know, we really need to, what do we need to do in those conversations? How can you manage that? And most importantly, how do we look after the staff member after that call to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are and that they're not a medical professional and that those sorts of conversations can weigh really heavily. So that was some training we provided just last week actually. So we also have staff development days where we bring all staff together, not just solicitors and legal execs, but our admin team, our business data analysts, our comms team, and make sure that as a whole business, we develop all our staff. So the CPD app is not just for solicitors, it's for all our staff. We want our secretaries to reach their potential as much as we want our solicitors to reach their potential. And just as the last thing, because I know we're short on time, as part of that annual appraisal process, we obviously set objectives for staff, and we want to keep those discussions alive, not just a once in a year document that we pick up and put down and a bit of a hassle to fill in. So we want people to be reviewing those objectives quarterly to make sure that we as a business are supporting them and that they understand that it's important that they need to be keeping up to date as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. Claire or Polly, anything in addition to that you'd like to add?
So I was just going to echo what you were saying. And for context, our organisation, we're a large multinational organisation. We've got 100,000 employees and our legal function is about 120 lawyers in the PLC business. And again, for us, the learning and development, it's fundamental to our organisation. And therefore, it becomes part of your culture because everybody within the organisation, of whatever level you are, is encouraged to and expected to do learning and development and to reflect on their learning development. And to do that, we also, every employer will set goals or objectives and they will have meetings with their line managers to go through those. One other thing I'd say that we do, which is to help our junior lawyers a bit more to think about this, is we have a separate development plan for them where they can record their career development, I suppose, of what they want to do, when they want to do it by, how they think they're going to get there. And in that, they can then put what they think other people within the organisation, including their line managers, may have to do to support them in that. So it brings up that conversation early. And then the line manager can think about finding those development opportunities and making sure that they're kind of moved over to that person to benefit their development. So I think all in all with that, it just drives a culture of a real positive culture of learning development, that it is fundamental to the business and everybody understands that.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. I think I'd also echo all those comments, and just to add quickly, I think 2 points. It can be quite helpful to enforce, or at least to grow that positive culture, to have a set of firm-wide values or ethics or some kind of firm-wide statement that's not only set but supported at the senior management level, but then at least is consistent with that desire for learning and development and increasing both value and brand and increasing people's feeling of belonging and culture in a business. So that's something we do in our firm, and I know many other firms will have a similar statement of ethics or core values. And I think related to that, the second point, using every opportunity or every experience as a learning opportunity. So as Daniela said, it doesn't need to wait for some formal training. Using an experience, whether something has gone exceptionally well or perhaps been more challenging than anticipated, that's an opportunity for discussion, for reflection and for learning.
Thank you. And staying with ethics, and if I can come to you first, Polly, so there's been a lot of debate currently around lawyers failing to meet the ethical standards expected of them, and practicing in line with professional ethical duties is fundamental to upholding the proper administration of justice and the rule of law, and it's a core competence for all solicitors. So how do you make sure that solicitors in your team or firm regularly carry out learning and development on ethics and professional duties? I can come to you first, Polly.
Thank you. It's a good question, and I think, as Richard said, there are a significant proportion of solicitors and firms that are complying with those obligations and do understand. But to go to the how and the why, so I think 4 points. The first I would say, and it's probably related to my point about integration of values, finding ways to integrate learning and development to your systems and to your processes. So instead of it becoming a standalone or static thing, it's something that is happening as part of the day-to-day operations. For context, I'm from a private practice background, so from a law firm, and we're lucky enough to have a people advisory team that works with employee engagement, learning and development. We have knowledge lawyers. Most firms will have a similar setup, but you don't need to have that operating model to have that kind of integration, where training is part of the performance management framework and part of general learning and development. To go specifically to the point around ethics, because as Richard said, people would expect us to have technical legal understanding, but to ensure that it is ethical training that's provided. I think the second point I would make would be around planning. So having a cadence that suits you and your organisation, whether that's going to be a quarterly, annually, a cadence where you commit to providing some kind of training on a specific topic, ethics or otherwise, and that can manage expectations in the firm but also of the solicitors there. And then related to that, ensuring that the competence and the training is a bit targeted. So rather than having something that is relevant, although it's important that it's relevant to everyone, also ensuring that there are opportunities to make it targeted to specific teams, whether that's practice or department level, but also at people at their different stages of their career, because competence does need to be role and context specific. So we, for instance, in our firm have a training program both at newly qualified and then at different stages of people's progression, whether that's becoming a manager, becoming a supervisor, and a transition to partnership. And having ethics and how that's relevant to those different stages in the transition is really important. I think the final thing I would say is that, again, building on the points everyone said, it doesn't just need to be a training session, an interactive opportunity to discuss learning and development. And that can be when a new policy is either updated or rolled out in the firm, when the SRA releases some new guidance. That can be at a team meeting, a department meeting, or any of those other opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Claire?
Yeah, so I think I would echo everything that you've said there, and it's similar to what we do. And I think cadence is really important that you've mentioned. So in terms of general ethics, we have annual training, and that annual training is for every single person in the organisation, and that is done face-to-face. It's one of the few trainings that we do face-to-face. And it's very much scenario-based, like the guidance that's come out. And it just gets everybody talking and understanding what ethics means and understanding what our requirement in relation to ethics is. It kind of sets that baseline. On top of that, we have the solicitor ethics information as well. So we will do that through functional calls, which is everybody in the function will join a call and it will be mentioned. Or if we feel there's a certain element of the function that needs more support, say for example our junior lawyers, we will have again a face-to-face and discuss the SRA guidance, the Law Society guidance for example, and enable them to have kind of a safe space to ask questions and really delve into it. Because I think it's important as an in-house solicitor as much as it is as a private practice solicitor, but it's really about getting that understanding, I think. So if there's new guidance that comes out, it's making sure that they're aware of it as well, so that they can then spend their own time looking at it.
Absolutely, very practical. Danielle, anything else to add?
I think on the ethics matter, it's really important to have the training on what our regulatory obligations are and discussions about what that means. But I think that it's also important to have a kind of error, a space where people can talk about making mistakes. And I think having a culture around that and making sure that people feel safe to come and tell you if something's gone wrong, because we know that it's not the thing that's gone wrong that's usually the problem. It's where somebody panics and tries to do something to get past the thing that's gone wrong, whether they try and cover it up or, you know, whatever it is that people feel panicked into doing. And I think that's a really important thing for ethics. It's not just the what are the rules and let's talk about it in, you know, over here in black and white terms, but it's what does it mean to us? What does that mean as an organisation? Are we a learning organisation? You know, for us, we have an error reporting app, and staff feel very happy to pop on there if they've made a mistake. Obviously, we don't want them to make mistakes, but if they do, they know that they're in a safe space. And the most important thing for us is that we know that there's an error has been made. It's logged on our system. Their manager will do a review of the particular file to make sure that the right action's been taken, and then we share that learning. So there's always the what did I learn from this and how have I shared that learning as part of the error report. And that for us is, you know, it's so valuable as a business to know why something has happened and what we can learn from it, because if things are happening in isolation and we don't know, then, you know, you almost have a shadow culture where you think you're behaving in one way and your organisation behaves a certain way, but then there are pockets of people doing things that perhaps they shouldn't. So I think that's a really important part of an ethical business, and understanding our ethical obligations is having that safe space to know that if you've made a mistake or you're unsure of something, that you can ask, and you can ask stupid questions and you can ask tricky questions, and you'll be dealt with compassion.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Richard mentioned that the declaration that all solicitors must complete to confirm they have met their continuing competence requirements has been strengthened recently. So what can firms do to get assurance that solicitors have met their continuing competence requirements when making this declaration? If I can start with you, Daniela, just as succinct as we can.
Yes, certainly something we've been thinking about recently. And very briefly, what we do is we send out an MS Forms document to all staff, and we say, fill this in, and it makes them all make a personal declaration about their CPD. And then my boss, my director, is assured that they've done what they needed to do over that year, and he can fill in that bulk renewal. And we reinforce that message at our coffee mornings and in our newsletters and that sort of thing.
That's great. Thank you. Claire?
Yeah, mine's really simple. Not quite as advanced as an MS Forms, though. We send an email asking for a declaration, and in that declaration, it is the standard 3 SRA declarations for us to enable us to make the practicing certificate application, but also asking for them to confirm that they've completed their record and log, just in case they need to provide evidence of the learning that they've done and the reflection on that. Just ask for confirmation that they've done that, and that's it.
Great. Sounds simple. Daniela, yours very similar.
Very similar, but also I would add we have, as part of our performance development framework, those reflections and those conversations are recorded in a form, and we have prompts in terms of that feedback similar to others, which is already on the system. And our training itself is recorded and attendance is recorded too, so we do have those records available.
That's great, thank you. And Richard also mentioned that some solicitors face challenges with reflection. So what are the benefits of solicitors regularly reflecting, and how can solicitors be supported or strongly encouraged to reflect? I'll stay with you, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of reflection, I appreciate that there has been quite a bit of commentary around that and whether reflection is meaningful or not. First, there are resources, as Richard's outlined, that the SRA has published. But I think from a practical perspective, and what we've found really useful, is people seeing the constructive developments that can happen after reflection. So whether that's process improvement as a team or increased training, supervision, or other things that actually benefit people's individual development, but also their workings as a team and working with the fee earning departments. Everyone sees the value in that. So seeing reflection, I think, is a constructive tool, and ensuring that as an organisation we take action as a result of that reflection becomes a very meaningful process.
Yeah, and it's the action bit that can't be forgotten. Claire?
Yeah, I think it is the action point. The one thing that I was going to say is that, similar to the other panellists, every employee has set goals and objectives every year. And it's not kind of one goal for the whole of the year. They can change throughout the year, and conversations will happen. Could be monthly, could be quarterly, with your line manager about those. But one of the things that we ask people to reflect on is their career development. And again, going back to especially the extra help for our junior lawyers, but it's about, where do you want to go, what do you want to be doing, and how do you think you can get there? And I think if you have that and you document that, you naturally reflect on what learning development you need to enable you to be able to get there. So I think often to get the reflection on your learning development, actually it's your career development that you can look at rather than your specific technical specialists.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Daniela, anything to add?
Only that I think sometimes we can overcomplicate reflection. Really it's just, what did I learn from it? How am I going to use it? What can I do differently next time? So we try and simplify it to make sure that people understand what we mean by that. There isn't an SRA definition, I don't think, although there's some good guidance about how to do it and what that might look like. So again, we just use it as part of our CPD app. We say, what did you do? Why did you do it? And what did you learn from it? And that's how we embed it, I suppose, into our processes.
Yeah, that's great. I love the simplicity. Thank you. Richard, coming to you. What resources does the SRA provide to help solicitors meet their continuing competence requirements?
I think I mentioned at the very start that we do have a lot of resources on our website, and they cover a range of topics. So there is lots of information on how you might want to approach reflection, how you do it, when you do it, what does it look like in practice, and how you might well prioritise different outcomes of that reflective activity. If you've come up with 3 or 4 kind of learning and development needs, how do you prioritise them? We also have lots of kind of information about how others are doing it as well, which might be helpful to people in the audience. And we also have a learning and development template, which is essentially a record of your reflection of your learning and development. That's something, if you're not aware of, you might want to take a look at, because I think it would enable you to kind of at least focus in on some of the things that we're asking for, but it's not compulsory to use. And I mentioned the annual assessment of competence, which is I suppose a good kind of holistic view of what we're seeing in terms of competence and learning and development across the profession on an annual basis.
That's great, thank you. Can you please give us your top tip or top tips that you would like the audience to leave with today? I'll start with you, Claire.
Thank you. I think this is I find this quite a hard thing to think of, actually, as kind of like a top tip. But I think for me, it would be, I think what helps our organisation is that learning and development and the ethical culture and what's expected is a really open and honest and transparent conversation. And I think that really helps. Finally, I was just going to say, share knowledge. The training, we've said it doesn't all need to be CPD training, it doesn't all need to be technical training. Share your knowledge, use other lawyers within your organisation to speak to other people. If they've got an area of specialism, use that. If you're not in an organisation that's quite as large, use your connections, use your networks to kind of share your knowledge around, and I think that's a tip.
That's great, thank you. Polly?
I think building on that, first making things practical. So it's really easy to provide training that just sets out what's already available online. Have those discussion scenarios where you discuss how you would apply or analyse information and judge a certain set of facts and make that specific and relevant to the people you're speaking to. Practical training alongside perhaps the other recorded training or things that are less interactive. And second, building on what Claire said, empower people around you. The act of communicating and providing training is of itself an area of competence. So bring in other team members. They can become champions for that issue. Bring in other fee earners or other people and empower them to become the person that's training and communicating.
Love that, thank you. And finally, Daniela.
I would say that help your staff reach their potential. I think retention is the new recruitment, really. In this agile world where we know that staff can move around a bit more freely, make sure that they're happy and that they're fulfilled and that they know that you care about their development as much as how much money they're bringing in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the panel session and gained some valuable insight and tips to help you remain competent. Before we turn to our panel, just unfortunately Claire Bennyworth, who was one of our panel members on the live session, cannot join us for the QA today, but we appreciate her sharing her knowledge and experience as part of our panel. So we're going to turn now to the questions that you've sent in. And our first question, I think I'm going to ask Richard from the SRA. The first question says, where a solicitor lacks experience in a specific area of law, should they refrain from taking instructions? Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Alex. I think in relation to that question, it's really important that individuals think about their code of conduct obligations as an individual solicitor. So the code of conduct very much talks about solicitors or individuals being competent to perform their role. There's also wider obligations perhaps on individuals who manage solicitors and also on firms to make sure that anyone they manage or employ are competent to perform their role. So I think when thinking about taking on work, an individual should have those kind of obligations and how they might meet those obligations front and center of their mind. And I would, I think it would be proper to say that, if someone didn't feel that they were particularly competent or lacked experience in a particular area, whether they should be thinking very long and hard about not doing that work to meet those obligations.
Thank you very much, Richard. Our second question is just around obligations on meeting our ethical and regulatory obligations. So the question says, could you provide more guidance about what the annual declaration means in practice? It would be great to have a better understanding of what good looks like for lawyers to determine that they have an up-to-date understanding and of the legal and ethical regulatory obligations relevant to your role. Polly, can I come to you first with this one?
Sure, certainly. Thank you,
Thank you.
Alex. So you will have heard on the session that we provided quite a few ideas or suggestions on how firms can ensure that solicitors have an opportunity to have training that is relevant to their role, context and fact specific, to ensure that their understanding of both ethical and legal obligations, and of course their regulatory obligations, are maintained. Now, as part of that process, we've also talked about how important it is to create a record of that learning and individuals having an opportunity to, as we've discussed, identify their needs, reflect on that, record that. So what good looks like can be part of that process, recording those learnings, whether that's through annual appraisals, whether that's through a different ongoing monitoring of those needs, whether that's through the promotion process or simply through some kind of learning and development framework. So I think that's the first thing. That's what good looks like. And the second thing I would say, and what I'd mentioned during the live session, is that embedding these things into our systems, so making ongoing competence part of what we're always doing every day, means that as part of what good looks like, it becomes a natural part of practicing rather than something which runs in parallel or is static.
Thank you. Thanks, Polly. Unless I can see any other hands up for this question, we will move on to question 3. I think this is back to us at the SRA. Richard, is there anything that triggers a visit or continued competence report request, or is it just a random selection?
It's a good question, and as I sort of explained it in the live session, I think a lot of what we do now in terms of our monitoring of whether or not solicitors and firms are meeting their ongoing competence obligations it involves us looking at reports and wider data that comes into us, and actually it's that data and the findings from that data that help us as a regulator focus on areas, both areas of practice, but kind of areas of what solicitors might be doing in relation to meeting their ongoing obligations, which kind of drive and focus where we target our work. So, looking at the practice level, if we've had a lot of reports, an increase in reports over a particular period of time, we might want to go and look into that area in more detail. And part of what that involves is us looking at whether or not solicitors are doing any learning and development in that area, and if so, what type of learning and development are they doing? Are there any gaps? And then maybe at the firm level, we might want to go in and talk about kind of their systems and procedures and policies and whether they're being applied or followed, and their general approach to continuing competence. So it's very much kind of, I suppose, kind of a data and evidence led approach, where we think there might well be risks might trigger a visit or a request to submit evidence of learning and development to us.
Thank you, Richard. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Daniela, I think I'm going to come to you for this one. During the live session, you talked about an app that your team had designed to help record CPD and members of your team's learning and development. We've had a question about what this app is. So could you go through that with us?
Yes, thanks very much. Yeah, as I mentioned on the session, we have a sort of training and development app where we can all record our CPD throughout the year. It's very simple. It's built in Access, Microsoft Access, and it's a form. I suppose it's more like a live form that you fill in, and it's just got a couple of boxes, which are what did you do, how long did it take, what was the date, and then there's a box around reflection, I suppose, after the event, in terms of why did you, I think there are two boxes, why did you do this training, and then another one which is what are your reflections and what are you going to take from it. And so it's really simple. There are only 5 questions, I think, in all, including what dates did you do the training, and it's a really helpful central record that we can run reports on and check compliance. And we ask every member of staff to record 1 item of CPD per month on the app, and it's part of our KPIs, our key performance indicators, which we check at our monthly meetings. And then sort of halfway through the year, we'll send out reminders, probably to say, your team are a bit low, can you make sure they're using the app? And it's not compulsory, but obviously we do strongly encourage it, because it's also another piece of the puzzle for when my boss, our director, fills in the bulk renewal at the end of the year. He can easily check if we are, if our solicitors are doing that. But I think I mentioned on the talk that we also do get every qualified member of staff to fill in a declaration to us as well. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you. Daniel, I might come back to you with just some tidbits about the benefits of recording CPD, but I'll just let Richard come in first from an SRA perspective on the same question. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think Daniel has given a really good example of how, as an organisation, you can really embrace the benefits of flexibility that our rules allow in terms of how you might want to record learning and development. It's about making a system or approach that works best for you. We don't prescribe how you should record learning and development, and in addition to apps, we have a learning and development template. It's something that you can use, print off, or make amendments to see how that works for you. And we know that actually there's lots of organisations out there who provide these types of kind of recording, learning and development services to professionals. And I think the Law Society has a free continuing professional development diary, which also solicitors can use. So I think really, there's lots of different ways you can do it. I think the key takeaways are make sure you are recording learning and development. And I think, as Daniela said, why is it you're carrying out or need to do some learning and development? But beyond that, I think there's lots of flexibility for people to decide how it best suits their circumstances.
Thank you, Richard. If I can just come back to Daniela and Polly, just about the benefits of recording CPD and learning and development. Should I come to you first, Daniela, and then to Polly?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's multiple benefits of recording it. Partly it's important from an audit perspective for a business that's completing the bulk renewals, but for the individual, I think it's just really important, because how often have we been to something where while you're in that course for the day, you think, oh, that's a great idea, we should do that differently back at the office, and then that day will pass, and then you're back to fighting fires and dealing with your casework. And actually, if you do take the time then to record your entry onto an app or in your own record, and take the time to think, what did I learn and how am I going to use that? I think it's really helpful for your own practice and development. It's also really useful when you think about what other gaps might you have. So you might go to a course or read an article or deliver a talk or something, and realize that you've got another gap that you've identified, and then you can build that into your plan for the rest of the year. I also need to do some training on X, Y, and Z. And our app, certainly, we also use it in another way, which is you can download your record into a spreadsheet, which you can attach then to your appraisal documentation, your performance reviews, to say, this is all the CPD I've done this year, this is where I've identified a gap, this is what more I'd like from you in this next 12 months as an organisation. So I think the benefits are multiple.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. Polly?
Thank you. I agree with everything Daniela said. I'd add to that, it's an opportunity by recording to allow your managers and the people you're working with to provide input and support to your ongoing competence and your development. And one of the really helpful things about reflecting is that it can be used as a constructive way, both to improve personally, but also for the team to grow, whether that's improvement in processes or sharing learning or empowering particular people to provide training. And that is best achieved through having a record that can then be discussed either at check-in meetings, performance appraisals, promotions, the things we've discussed. Another point, I think it's important to remember that ongoing competence isn't limited to technical legal knowledge. And whilst that's the first thing we often think about as lawyers, there are so many other skills, and they're set out, for instance, in the SRA statement of competence. And it's quite easy to forget that those things are relevant to ongoing competence, whether that's working with other people, professionalism, ethics, just judgment. So analysing particular facts and applying them to matters. And I think working with other people is really important in terms of not only those interpersonal skills, but relating to clients, whether that's negotiating or third parties that you're dealing with. And all of those skills are often best reflected, or at least considered, when there is a record and perhaps a template which draws people's mind to those issues, so they're considering more than just their technical legal competence.
Thank you, Polly. That's a really, really helpful. That is all the questions that we have that we can answer online. We did have one question about responsibilities for consultant solicitors, and we'd like to give this some thought. So if that was your question, we'd like to give that some thought and perhaps come out with some definitives, or at least our opinion in this space around sort of next year, maybe around the next PC window. But we definitely will give that question some thought. Thank you. Okay, thank you for the time. Thank you to our panelists for joining us again for the virtual session. We really appreciate you've given up so much of your time to help on this really important topic. As I mentioned before, all the resources we talked about in this session are available on our event on demand webpage. This is linked in the description below the video. We really hope you enjoyed this virtual event. The next one will be tomorrow at midday, 12 o'clock, looking at your accounts rules queries. We'd really like to hear your feedback, so please let us know what you thought by clicking on the feedback link below. It should only take you a minute or two to complete, and it really helps us to improve what we do. But that's it. Have a wonderful afternoon. See you again in April 27. Take care, everybody.